Now, the reason why I have to be like really detailed in my clips is because you will see the end results after you view all the clips, keeping in mind that this case is against the corporate bodies, and I'm the plaintiff and I'm one person. Okay, so this is the new age system that is now in process at the moment with our courts. But today I will be talking about the case against my employer. So excuse me if I'm looking down, it's because I'm referring to my notes. There'll probably be several episodes for this case because I wanted it to be thorough with it, and just because it is the core case of everything else that links to this case. Why I say that, because my employer is where everything started. And that is where I was working, and that's where the breaches started. So the employer in this case is the Ministry of Justice. However, I did work for the government before I worked for the courts. I was working at the departments of correction. This is after having several other public occupations in the public sector. So just a little bit of background. I did a how did I get my job? I did an advanced certificate in business administration, where I got a student loan out, and I did some study, and at this time, and I was studying while I was being a single parent to 3 young children. So that's how I got my foot in the door working for the government. And my first job working in the government was with the Department of Corrections as an administration officer. So from there, I had a fixed contract that led me to several other contracts within the Department of Corrections and different agencies. So I kind of like moved around a bit, and that is where I got my first court experience, was at Manukau Courts as a administration officer. Back in, oh goodness, I think it was 1999. So that is how I got my foot in the door working for the government. But before that, I had lots of other little jobs that I was doing before I did my advanced certificate in business administration. So I did start, first of all, when the Manukau courts opened up, and that is where I first started working for the courts. So I was responsible for the administration in that area, and that's when I first got my experience with the courts. Eventually, it was in the first instance, it was a fixed contract, but then I was looking for a permanent role, which I got a permanent role working for a Manurewa periodic detention. It was a full-time job and it was permanent. So that's where I got my foot in the door working in the government agencies. So I worked at the periodic detention as an administration officer. However, I did have a lot to do. It was like a PA role. Basically, you're running the whole periodic detention, and yeah, so basically kind of run the administration office. At that time, I had a manager at the time who was excellent. Yeah, it was an awesome job. I really enjoyed it, and at that time it just was suitable with what I was going through at that time as far as family was concerned. And I got that job through the papers. Circumstance changed. I relocated and I needed to find a job closer to home. And with that, I saw the job in the New Zealand Herald, it was called back then, you know, the paper. There was none of this online anything for a job. Everything was, you had to apply, look for jobs through the Herald, and that's how I got the job. And I got shortlisted. So I do have a photo of my manager who was actually on the panel at that time. I've actually submitted photos and video clips with this case as evidence and proof. That what I've written on my statement of claim, meaning the names of the people are real, and I actually had photos submitted as exhibits for this case. Going back to the statement of claim, so the statement of claim against my employer, who is the Ministry of Justice. So even though the name changed, and I actually worked, first of all, the departments of courts and jury trial depositions. And so that is where I started working in the courts. So in that role, I was responsible. I was responsible for case managing, handling the exhibits, taking courts, swearing in the witnesses or anyone that needs to give evidence in court. So swearing them in, you know, using the Bible or whatever they chose, whether you know, they want to affirm, or some people would ask for their own beliefs that they, you know, like a Quran or something like that, just an example. So whatever they ask to be sworn on, that is what is taken place in court. The hearing is a deposition hearing, and what usually takes place in the deposition hearing is when a case has been or whoever has been prosecuted, the prosecution brings their case to the court. The evidence is submitted in the deposition hearing to see if it has sufficient evidence for it to go to the next stage, which would be jury trial. So all that has changed now, but that is what my role was when I did jury trials deposition. Now my role was just dealing with purely murder cases, sexual violation cases, serious fraud cases, anything like that. It was all indictable charges back then. That's what it was called back then, indictable offences, which is the serious of serious cases. You know, it's not the same as you would be in the summary jurisdiction. So that is what the kind of case I did do for the departments of courts, and I did pretty well. I actually ended up mastering the job, and I loved it and I enjoyed it, but circumstance changed. And then I had to find a job closer to home because I'd relocated, and by this time my kids, you know, age, they're growing up. One of my children was hitting teenage years, and so I had to change my circumstance to suit family life. So I got a job working at the Waitakere courts, but the role there was exactly the same. I still carried my deputy registrar powers. In fact, you keep it wherever you move. You have those authorities with you once you've been sworn in. So that kind of like follows you, even though the job description changes. That is what happened. So I was still a deputy registrar when I moved, and so I transitioned from the Auckland jurisdiction doing indictable charges to transition to the summary jurisdiction in the district court. As time went on, the Department of Courts transitioned to the Ministry of Justice. At this stage, because I was working for the Ministry of Justice, which is my employer, I put in a statement of claim and I'm suing my employer, but from knowledge and experience, it's not a civil case, but however, this is the court protocol and rules that we would follow if we have an issue or something that we have against our, the agencies or our employer. This is the sue or press criminal charges against agencies who've done serious wrongdoing. So at this stage, I'm dealing with each corporate body involved in my case and using the court system that is available to me. This is the right process, is actually to go through the civil. This is why it's important that you have evidence and also being aware of serious breaches. Usually from just one breach, eventually ends up being a pretty serious case like mine. So the downfall and the blame of the liability of where it started or who didn't do their job, usually that comes from all the complaints or just proof of evidence that there's a very serious malfunction of the system or somebody has perverted the course of justice. But however, the civil jurisdiction is where you would start a case like mine. They say that it doesn't go to criminal. I've done my research. It does, it can, and it still does. It just depends who you get and if you're not being prejudiced or biased against or blacklisted like I have. And that's what the case clearly reveals. It is a trafficking in persons case, and that has the penalty of 20 years for individual or corporate bodies involved. The Department of Courts, when I was working for them, it was very different then. The agencies were all split. Meaning when I say split, I'm talking about the police was split, the judiciary was split, and then there was the deputy registrar and the courts. They were split. When I say split, they were all kind of like had their own court protocols, and like there was that separation as far as like when I was trained to be a deputy registrar, I was trained not to be biased or prejudiced, and just it was all about administrating law and justice and not to take sides. So the first hearing for this case was on the 1st of November this year. But I will walk you through from the beginning, in the middle, to the end. This statement of claim was first lodged with the judiciary review application that was submitted to the courts on the 21st of December 2022. Okay, but the actual application that was under judicial review was against the Ministry of Health and City Med. So this was first lodged then, but the courts didn't process it until the 9th of February. I asked them that they all needed to be processed together because that is what I'm used to, and that's common sense. It just makes sense that all these applications ride together, but that didn't happen. They didn't do that. So I kept asking them, and then there were people on holiday, all kinds of excuses, and eventually it didn't get officially lodged in the court system until the 9th of February 2023. So first of all, before I get into the case, I am actually suing my employer for exploitation, for breach of contract, for false imprisonment, false statements, and standard of care applicable to persons under legal duties or performing unlawful acts. I'm also suing them for crimes against the person. I'm suing for duties tending to preservation of life, harassment, assault and battery, suicidal pact, intentional damage to property, loss of liberty, false statements and affirmation, impeding rescue, perverting the course of justice, breach of good faith, gross negligence, sabotage, and the key one that says it all really, it's a trafficking in persons case.